Well, let's get into the twisting and turning. Here's the top Republican in the House, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, trying to defend the president on 60 Minutes last night.
What do you make of this exchange? President Zelensky says we are almost ready to buy more javelins from the United States for defense purposes. And President Trump replies, I would like you to do us a favor, though.
Well, you just added another word.
No, it's
you said, I'd like you to do a favor, though?
Yes, it's in the White House transcript.
When I read the transcript, President Zelensky brings up a javelin as a protection for anti-tank, something that President Obama would not sell. That President Trump did to protect Ukraine.
How do you expect the president's defense to roll out going forward?
The defense of what?
Well, there's an impeachment inquiry.
Yeah, there's an impeachment inquiry going forward. It probably never would move forward had the Speaker waited 48 hours to have the transcript.
I'll ask you again, how does the defense of the president, in your view, roll out from here?
Why would we move forward with impeachment? There's not something that you have to defend here.
You say the president has done nothing wrong. I take that to mean that you find it appropriate that the president asked Mr. Zelensky for an investigation of his Democratic rivals.
The question before the House of Representatives is to impeach the president based upon a phone call that the Speaker never even heard.
Mr. Leader, with great respect to you, and I apologize for interrupting, but these are the White House talking points that were emailed to the Congress earlier this week.
Well,
I am asking you,
you.
Was it appropriate for the president to ask for investigations of his Democratic rivals with another foreign leader?
I've never seen one talking point from a White House. I'm talking to you based upon the most important facts we have. The whistleblower wasn't on the call. The IG, Inspector General, didn't read the call. But you and I have all the information we need. The president did nothing in this phone call that's impeachable.
David Ignatius, it's a see no evil, hear no evil, say no evil strategy. You know, we've been asking how Republicans could defend Donald Trump after looking at the transcript from the White House, after looking at the whistleblower complaint, and it wasn't even a transcript. It was just a White House memorandum. Here you have the leader of Republicans in the House of Representatives who hasn't even read the transcript, who hasn't even read that memorandum, because everybody that read it said the most important line, the most germane line, was the one that Scott Pelley read him. I'm going to need something from you, though. And Kevin McCarthy didn't even know that was in the transcript. It is inexplicable and sadly so revealing of the state of the Republican Party in 2019.
It's a stunning moment. I've got the transcript in front of me. The president, I would like you to do us a favor, though. Nobody in the White House seems to have understood that the information in the transcript itself, put together with the facts that are known about what was happening in that period, paint a picture of a president requesting the most personal political advantage from a new Ukrainian president who was at that time facing a U.S. arms embargo. The commanders of the Ukrainian army on the ground who needed weapons that we had promised them and Congress had voted to give them were waiting for their arrival. They were held up on direct orders of the president. And here's the president saying, here's what I want. And he mentions two things. Investigate, and then this sort of gobbledygook about CrowdStrike, but it clearly is a reference to the beginnings of what came to be the Mueller investigation. He's saying, go back, we think you've got something in servers, we want it, Giuliani will talk to you about it. And then he's very specific about the Biden matter. He just asks directly for help, work with Giuliani, work with our Attorney General, we need this, it's really bad, it's really bad. Mm-hmm. The White House doesn't seem to get that a fair-minded reading of, I will find out, but I'd say a fair-minded reading by the public of this transcript that they released leads people to say there's something wrong here. It doesn't square with what a president should do. And if they start from the position that, there's nothing to see here, it's a perfect, that's the president's phrase, it's perfect. Well, let's read it again. Let's read it again. I would like you to do us a favor, though, in the context of this arms embargo. Something that has really bothered people there.
And to add to David's point, you see, we've actually had anecdotal evidence talking to Trump supporters over the weekend who are all in until now. That's not okay. And why, Joe? Because, with the Mueller report, it was 400-plus pages. It took a long time, and it was easy to muddle it up. You can complicate the complicated.
Right.
But you can't complicate something simple. And people see what happened plain and clear. They see very simply what happened, and they may not be following history and following politics every day. They know that's wrong.
Well, this is easy to figure out. And Jonathan Lemire, we've found out how at least Kevin McCarthy carries through the day defending President Trump. He makes sure he remains ignorant of the most basic charges against the president. Of a
8-page memo?
Yeah,
you can't read that?
Didn't read the 8-page memo, was unaware of the most damning line from the memo. We know a lot of Republican members never read the Mueller report. In fact, most of them that I've talked to never bothered reading the Mueller report. And so you take all this together, and of course, this is why they can run around saying nothing to see here. Move along, move along. Or those who have read the report and those who have read the whistleblower complaint, those who have read the White House so-called transcript, that memo, they've taken up the James Carville strategy of pointing off in the distance and saying, hey, look at the bird, look at the bird, even though they know that theory they're pushing about Joe Biden is discredited. And this, again, I just want to say this really briefly. It is so important. If you actually read the memo from the White House, the so-called transcript, you see that the president's talking about CrowdStrike and Hillary and Mueller. That's all the preamble. That's all gobbledygook. That's all what we were told was called dicta in law school. It was all the wind-up and the delivery for the pitch talking about investigating the Bidens. How do we know that? Because Zelensky was smart enough not to bite on CrowdStrike and not to bite on Hillary and not to bite on Mueller. Because when he brought those up briefly, Zelensky said, yes, we're getting Giuliani over here and we're going to begin that investigation, which then opened the door for Donald Trump to start talking about investigating the Bidens.
Right, and you've hit upon a vital difference here, which is why I think we are seeing the increase in the polls for impeachment. The Mueller probe was 2 years long. It was confusing. It was opaque. This is sort of simple and easy to understand, the quid pro quo. The president's own words are the best evidence against him, and that is why the Democrats are moving forward, and the public seems to be warming to the idea. I also would argue that perhaps the most important Sunday surrogate appearance from a Republican yesterday was actually Tom Bossert, the president's former Homeland Security advisor, who was on, I believe, ABC, who addressed head-on this Ukraine theory, that Ukraine was involved in the election meddling, that Ukraine had the server. And he said it simply wasn't true, and that he and others in the White House told the president repeatedly that it wasn't true. But it was something that he hung on to because he could not face the idea that he received Russian interference that may have helped him win the election. We know that he thinks that makes him an illegitimate president. That's the fear that he has. And it shows, again, the president willing to dance in the fever swamps, the conservative fringes, and these conspiracies he's led by, among others, Rudy Giuliani, who is continuing to push those going forward. And that is where the president in this White House is right now. There isn't a robust defense. There isn't a suggestion of fighting on the facts. They're just still trying to muddle the issue. They're trying to throw things up against the wall, create the same sort of smokescreen they did during the Mueller probe, confusing the issue, confusing the public. But it seems like it's going to be much harder to pull off this time around in a far simpler story for the Americans to understand.
And then, Luce, even though impeachment, I believe now at this point is likely, especially if you see the numbers continuing to go up by the day for Americans supporting an impeachment inquiry or even removing the president from office, even if that does happen, you talk about how the, quote, soft nepotism of the Bidens will end up hurting Joe Biden inside the Democratic primary and will accrue to the advantage of Elizabeth Warren and other Democrats in that race.
Yeah, I think the problem for Biden is that Trump is going to be continually bringing the topic back to something that wasn't illegal, that was perfectly within the law, what his son did, joining Ukraine's largest gas company, and that even though there is no comparison between the high crimes and misdemeanors the president is accused of and the legal money-making that the former vice president's son was carrying out, some of this is going to stick. Washington, part of the problem with Washington is what's normal, what's legal. And I guess monetizing, a powerful relative's name, such as your dad being vice president, to the tune of $50,000 a month is just not going to look good. It's kind of emblematic of what Americans outside of the Beltway see as being wrong with what's inside the Beltway. And of course, Elizabeth Warren has based a lot of her campaign, and indeed prior to this campaign, a lot of her political career, on tackling corruption, on tackling the revolving door nexus in Washington, D.C., and the effects of lobbying money. Hunter Biden was a lobbyist. And also, I think, a very smart foreign policy, which links corruption overseas to corruption at home. The role of New York in laundering money from oligarchs in places like Ukraine and Russia and elsewhere, and the law firms there, the accountancy firms there, the lobby shops there, the reputation launderers there that funnel oligarch donations to to art galleries. So Warren, I think, is quite well positioned not to talk about Biden at all, but to benefit from some of the mud that's going to stick to Joe Biden from Trump just continually day and night throwing it at him.
Yeah. Elizabeth Warren's life reflects her message, and that definitely works at a time like this because people are looking for truth. And I kind of parallel the Hunter problem with Hillary Clinton's speeches. Perfectly legal.
Right.
She made a ton of money, but it didn't reflect what her campaign, what she was trying to stand for in her campaign. And that's where that's the category, legal. Right. But what are you doing?
Legal but questionable. Ed always also brought up how Hunter Biden was on the board of Delaware's biggest bank when his father was a senator there.
Totally
Again,
legal, maybe.
Completely legal, but as you drew in 2016, talking about Hillary Clinton, the comparisons. She did not have the contrasts required to defeat Donald Trump because of problems in her own family, problems with some of the things that she did. And so I wouldn't even put Hunter Biden on the level of what the Clintons did. No. And obviously not on the level of what Donald Trump and his family do.
Absolutely not.
You look at Donald Trump sitting down and meeting the leader of China, President Xi, and on that same day, his daughter gets a lot of trademark and patent waivers in China.
That's the joke of this, is that the Trump kids are out there doing this
that's the thing.
all over the place.
It's hypocrisy coming from the Trumps. The question that Ed brings up, and I think very legitimately is, will Democrats say, hey, wait a second, we love Joe, we're not blaming Joe for any of this, but we need a break from the old ways of doing business in Washington, D.C., and let them fight that out over there. And whether it's
that's my worry.
Whether it's Beto or whether it's whether it's Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or whoever it is, Kamala, will they look at all of this and say, okay, let them fight it out? We need to get somebody who's completely separated from this ordeal.
I hope there's fairness. Joe Biden and his wife, Jill, have served for decades, and they want to go back.
Honorably.
And they've been honorable.
Honorably.
And real patriots. Still ahead on Morning Joe, new details in another one of the president's conversations that the White House tried to lock down. The one where he spilled intelligence secrets to the Russians. What else the president reportedly said on that infamous Oval Office meeting. Plus, we'll talk about the status of Brexit with former British Prime Minister David Cameron. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.